Today on Sugar Spun Run, we'll be making a lemon tart. Hey Sugar Spun Bakers, Sam here, and today I am so excited to be sharing another carefully tested, well-researched, and perfected recipe. This one is great for summertime, great for any time. It has a perfect sweet, tart, lemony flavor from fresh lemons. Let's go ahead and get started. Unsurprisingly, the first thing you need for your tart is going to be a tart crust. Now, I am going to be making a pretty traditional pastry crust. It's of French origins, and I like to make mine in the food processor, like I like to do with a lot of my desserts, because it saves a lot of time, effort, and dishes. We'll start by adding 1.5 cups of all-purpose flour to the basin of our food processor. We're also going to add 1/2 cup of powdered sugar. And you do want to use powdered sugar here instead of granulated sugar. It's going to help give the crust more of a flaky shortbread-esque consistency, which is traditional with tart crusts. We're also going to add a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. This is just table salt for a little bit of flavor. And we're just going to blitz this briefly until it's combined, until the ingredients are combined. Now the next thing we're going to need for today's recipe is 8 tablespoons of unsalted butter. Your butter should be very cold, so mine has been in the freezer. Let me grab that real quickly. It's nice and cold, so I'm going to cut this into 8 tablespoons, or 8 pieces, about the same size, before I add it to my food processor. Now cold butter is very important because it's just going to help give our crust the proper consistency. If you were to use softened butter, your dough is not going to be quite as tart. It's going to not be quite as flaky, and we want it to be a little bit more flaky. And this has actually been in the freezer a little longer than I typically like, which is fine. It's even better for the crust, but it's going to just make it a little harder to cut. We'll just scatter the butter pieces evenly over our flour mixture. And I don't know if you guys can hear all the birds outside today, but it's a really nice day and I have my windows open, so hopefully you think it's a pleasant soundtrack to the audio if you do hear it. All right, we're just going to blitz this again. We're going to do about 10 1-second pulses, and then we'll take a look at this and make sure it looks nice. And what do I mean by make sure it looks nice? You want to have a coarse, crumbly mixture. So the butter shouldn't be too broken up. It should resemble coarse crumbs. So let me make sure you can see this. So if you can get a close-up of this, there are some butter pieces that are like the size of a pea, or as I prefer to say, the size of a chocolate chip, because those of you watching are probably, like myself, and more familiar with chocolate chips than peas. So we want to have some of those larger pieces remaining. This is perfect. Let me just slide this over. And the next ingredient we need for our tart crust is 1 large egg. And then I also like to add a little bit of vanilla extract to my tart crust. This is just a 1/2 teaspoon. It just gives it a little bit more of that sweet shortbread cookie-esque feel, which some people are going to say, well, shortbread shouldn't have vanilla in it, but mine always does. So I like to add a little vanilla, but it's optional. And we're just gonna whisk everything together really quickly. And we'll just drizzle this over our ingredients. And now we are going to pulse everything again, 1-second pulses, until the mixture begins to cling together. And you do want to make sure you're pulsing this and doing brief pulses rather than just cranking up your blender or your food processor and walking away, because that is not going to incorporate things properly. You're going to get a dough that is not mixed or incorporated evenly, and then your crust is going to suffer for that. So here we are at 10 pulses. Let's take a look at the dough. All right, this is clinging together quite nicely. What you are really looking for is if you take a piece of dough or a couple of clumps of dough and press it between your fingers, it should cling together. This is doing exactly that, so I don't want to go any further. I'm going to turn this out onto a piece of plastic wrap. And grab my plastic wrap, my nemesis, because it never cooperates with me. Always be careful with the food processor blade. Don't want to cut yourself with that. All right, we're just going to turn this out. I do it right on my plastic wrap. Once the dough is clinging together, you really want to handle it as little as possible because you don't want to overwork the butter. You don't want the butter to start melting. I'm just going to form this into a disc, and I'm using the plastic wrap to do that, as you can see. But I don't want it to be crumbly either. That's really important. Otherwise, when you go to roll it out, it's just going to kind of break apart on you. So you can use your hands, just don't overdo it with your hands. Let's form this into a nice disc. The edges don't have to be perfect, but if they're not ragged and jagged looking, again, that's going to make it easier to roll out, give you more even edges. And I like to flatten mine to be a little less than 1 inch because it'll make it easier to roll out, it'll chill it faster. All right, now the difficult part, we have to wait for this dough to chill. You're going to pop it in your fridge for an hour before we go any further. All right, it's been an hour, so we can go ahead and roll out our pie dough or tart crust. I'm going to just lightly flour my surface with a little bit of flour. I'm going to roll this out into a 10 to 11 inch circle. We're going to be placing it in a 9-inch pie plate, tart plate. I keep calling it a pie. Now I'm going to lightly dust my crust with a little bit of flour. Let's roll this. If you notice a lot of cracking happening, your dough may be a little bit too cold, especially if you chilled it for longer than an hour. So just let it sit at room temperature for a couple minutes if you see a lot of this. I think it'll be okay, so I'm going to just keep going slowly. And one thing I do whenever I'm rolling out tart crust, pie crust, or even sugar cookies is I will periodically scrape under the dough and apply more flour just to keep it from sticking. Because you don't want to have a nice rolled out dough and then not be able to move it. All right, this may not be a perfect circle, but it doesn't have to be. It's larger than 10 inches, no matter which way you check it. So I'm going to move it over to my tart pan. And we'll just gently lay this into our tart pan. And you will notice you have a little bit of excess dough. That's normal. The crust is rolled to be about 1/4 of an inch thick. Now I'm just using my fingers to press this into the sides so it's firmly fixed in the pan. Don't worry about the excess. We'll take care of this in just a second. And then I just use my rolling pin to clean up the edges. Remove the excess pie tart dough. Man, keep calling it a pie. Now the next step for this is the freezer, where it's going to need to chill for 30 minutes. I like to add my pie weights before it goes into the freezer. And the easiest way to do this is take a piece of parchment paper, and the parchment paper is not going to want to sit very nicely. So my little cheat tip is to crumple it up, uncrumple it, crumple it again from a different direction. Maybe one more time for good measure. And then it should fit very neatly in to the tart pan. And now we can add our pie weights. See, this is why I'm confused, because you use so many of the same things for pies as tarts. So many things are interchangeable. So here are my pie weights. I'm just going to carefully distribute them into my tart crust. All right, this is going into our freezer. We'll see it in 30 minutes. So when your dough has almost finished chilling, you're going to want to get your oven preheating to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. Make sure you have a rack arranged to the center of your oven, and make sure your oven is fully preheated before you take your tart crust out of the freezer. My oven is preheated, so I'm going to take this over, and we're going to start by cooking it for 20 minutes. Oh, and I almost forgot. I do like a little bit of extra security when I'm baking my tart. As with a springform pan, sometimes they can leak, especially if you're making something with so much butter in it. So I am going to just place this on a parchment paper lined baking sheet. That way, if there is any leakage of the butter that were to occur, the baking sheet will catch it and they clean up so much easier. Okay, after 20 minutes in the oven, don't turn off your oven. We're going to try to work quickly here. We are going to very carefully remove our pie weights. I have a heat-proof container here. I'm just gonna pour these weights into there. They're very hot. Do not burn yourself. We can get rid of the parchment paper. We don't need it any longer. We're going to take this back to the oven where it's going to cook for another 5 minutes or until it's starting to turn a nice light golden brown. Right back. All right, this is looking pretty beautiful, if I do say so myself. So we're going to let this cool just a little bit right now. So at this point, I like to start making my lemon filling. We are going to need a 1/2 cup of lemon juice, and I can't say I suggest, I demand that you use fresh lemons for this. Please don't rip yourself off and use bottled lemon juice. It just doesn't have the same flavor that fresh lemons do. You're going to need a 1/2 cup of fresh squeezed lemon juice. Sorry, with the knife, that wasn't meant to be threatening. And we are going to squeeze that right now. Now, to make sure you're getting all of the juice out of your lemon that you possibly can, you can go ahead and roll it like you just saw me do between your palm and your surface. It's supposed to make things nice and extra juicy. Also, you don't want any seeds in here, but if one or two slip through, we'll catch them later with our fine mesh strainer. So it's not a huge deal. Oh man, we're so close. I don't want to cut into another lemon. We're gonna make this happen. We made it. We got to a half cup without cutting open our last lemon. So like I said, usually it takes me 4, but today we made it on just 3. So now I'm also going to prep my eggs. You're going to need 2 whole eggs for today's recipe. This is basically a lemon curd we're making, which is pretty egg heavy. So 2 whole eggs. And then we're also going to need 4 egg yolks. That's just the yolks. Of course, the easiest way to do this, just crack the egg, pass that yolk back and forth between the 2 halves of the shell. Drop that yolk right in there. You can save the egg whites to make something else. Save it to make macarons or meringue cookies, or you could even use the egg whites to make a meringue for this lemon tart. Be nothing wrong with doing that. 2. Okay, I keep hearing from people that they prefer to just crack the whole egg into the bowl and then just kind of snatch the yolk out of there. It seems kind of messy, but oh, I mean, it works. So if you prefer to separate your egg yolks this way, you can, but I think I'm gonna stick with my traditional method. Okay, lemon juice, eggs, egg yolks. Let's head over to our stovetop and make that lemon filling for our tart. Okay, you're going to need a medium-sized saucepan, and to this we are going to add 1 cup of granulated sugar, an 1/8 teaspoon of salt. We're also going to add the eggs and egg yolks that we just prepped, as well as our lemon juice. Now we're just going to whisk everything together, get everything nicely combined, and get those egg yolks nicely broken up. And then I'm also going to add a 1/2 cup or 8 tablespoons of unsalted butter. And I've cut this into pieces. Now, before I turn on my stovetop, I also like to make sure I have a heat-proof bowl and a fine mesh strainer nearby because, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to be pouring our curd through the strainer. Now we can turn our stovetop to medium-low heat, and we're going to stir until our butter is completely melted. Don't crank up your heat and do this on high. The butter will separate, it'll be a mess. Now I said to do this until the butter is melted, but once the butter is melted, we're going to continue to whisk, and we're going to do this until the mixture has thickened a bit. And I like to do the spoon or spatula test. I want to make sure that it will coat the back of a spoon or the side of a spatula. I'll show you what that looks like. Now this is not going to thicken like a pudding thickens, but it will become a little bit thicker. I think it might be easiest to show you with the back of a spoon. So let's take a look. So you can see there's a light coating of the mixture on the back of the spoon, and if I use my finger to make a trail through, it holds its shape. It's not flowing back together. So I'm pretty happy with the consistency of this. Let me give it another quick whisk. And let's quickly remove this from the heat because we don't want our eggs cooking. And let's pour this through our fine mesh strainer that we have ready. And if you want to temp your eggs to make sure everything's done cooking, you're looking for a temperature of 165 degrees. Just use an instant read thermometer. Strain everything through. This is a very fine mesh strainer, so it takes a second. But we're going to catch any impurities, any tiny bits of egg white that may have cooked. You don't want that in your mixture. Any seeds from the lemons, we're gonna catch all of that. You might be able to see, I actually ended up with quite a lot of little bits of cooked egg white. Not ideal, but sometimes when I'm cooking on camera, it's hard to move as quickly as I can. So this sat on it a little bit longer than is ideal. But no worries, we're straining everything. Let me scrape everything off using a different spatula. And my tart crust here is still a little bit warm. That's not a problem. Let's go ahead and pour this right into our crust. It looks beautiful, it smells beautiful. I can't wait for you to try this. Such a nice summer dessert, or dessert any time of the year that you want to be reminded of summer. So I like to let this cool a bit until it's closer to room temperature, and once it is, I will pop it in the fridge for it to chill and set completely. If you're worried about it absorbing any odors from the fridge, like maybe you've got a cut up onion in there or something, you'll want to cover yours, but I personally don't usually cover mine just because I like the nicest smooth surface, so it depends on how vain you are about your tarts. Now for chilling, you're going to want to chill it in the fridge. I'd say a bare minimum of 4 hours, preferably 6 hours, and even more preferably chill it overnight so it can set completely. Let's go ahead and take this over to the fridge. Okay, so I do have a lemon tart that I prepped last night, of course. But one thing I like to do with my lemon tarts is top them with some whipped cream. My homemade whipped cream, you've probably made it before, it's super simple. You're going to need 3/4 cup of cold heavy cream, 1/4 cup of powdered sugar, so lightly sweetened whipped cream complements the tart instead of overpowering it, and just a 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract. Then we'll use an electric mixer to beat everything together until we have thick, fluffy cream and stiff peaks. This is beautiful. You could just dollop it on the pie if you'd like, but I'm going to quickly show you how I do those super simple decorations that are on the tart that you may have seen in the beginning of the video, the very beginning, or that you may have seen on my blog, assuming I don't lose all my whipped cream. I'm just putting this in a large piping bag that I have fitted with the Ateco 846 tip. The Ateco 848 would also work nicely. And I don't want to overwhelm the pie with whipped cream, which is why I made a half batch of my whipped cream recipe. I keep calling it a pie. This is a tart. I'm sorry. Got pies on the brain. There's not that much difference, just no top crust. All right, and then I just do a couple of really simple designs. Let's see, simple star right there, some bigger swirls. Just do a variety of different sizes. And reserve the piece that has the largest swirl of whipped cream for myself. All right, I personally think that looks pretty cute, but feel free to decorate however you'd like. All right, let's go ahead and cut into this beauty. Of course, we need to remove it from the tart pan before serving. Be careful cutting into it, because if you just kind of crank down your knife, you could break the edge of the tart crust off, and I always obviously try to avoid doing that. And maybe someone has a better way, but I just kind of am gentle cutting into the crust. It's a sturdy crust, but it has limitations. Take a look at that. All right, I hope you guys enjoyed today's recipe for this super delicious homemade lemon tart. If you try this one, please leave me a comment. I always really love hearing from you. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Nice crisp crust. This is amazing. This is so amazing. Messy, but amazing. 10 1-second pulses, and then we'll take a look at how I have to start working on these arm muscles. Those birds are very loud. I hope you guys like birds. A lemon tart that I prepped last night. My cute little baby whisk. Don't be afraid of the dough, just respect the dough. Delicious. Quality control.